Journalist Glenn Greenwald highlighted a recent interview with Professor Noam Chomsky where he touches on the Russia-Ukraine war. Let's watch.
Well, there is fortunately one statesman in the United States and Europe who has laid out, a person of a high political figure who has made a very sensible statement about how you can solve the crisis, namely by facilitating negotiations instead of undermining them, and moving towards establishing some kind of accommodation in Europe, maybe along in which there are no military alliances, but just mutual accommodation. He didn't say it, but it's something like what George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, not the second, proposed in the early 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, proposed what they called a partnership for peace, which would be open for Europeans generally, Eurasians as well. It wouldn't eliminate NATO, but he would live up to the promise that NATO would not expand to the east, firm promise to Gorbachev. Keep to that, allow NATO there, but kind of de-emphasize it so other countries could join, including Russia for that matter, join the Partnership for Peace. Tajikistan joined, for example, not NATO, and move towards a world, a Europe, Eurasia with no military alliances. Actually, de Gaulle had similar vision. Emmanuel Macron, in his initiatives trying to contact Putin, suggested something similar. So going back to the one Western statesman, he didn't mention all of this, but he suggested something similar. Move towards negotiations and diplomacy instead of escalating the war. Try to see if he can bring about an accommodation, which would be roughly along these lines. His name is Donald J. Trump.
Chomsky said later in the interview that he believes former President Trump is a, quote, deeply dangerous figure. Yet he is the one Western statesman who has said, quote, the right way out, end quote, of Ukraine.
So I get where Chomsky was coming from. And, previously, Donald Trump has been less interventionist and less hawkish than other elements of the Republican Party, even than less than other elements of the Democratic Party, than Hillary Clinton, et cetera. Right? He has said we should end these disastrous foreign entanglements. He talked about getting out of Afghanistan. He didn't actually do it. I left that to Biden. So I get all that. I cannot recall, and I cannot find, and I have no idea, with all due respect to Professor Chomsky, I have no idea what the hell he is talking about. Because what has Trump said about the Ukraine that is articulating the get out, like this feels like filling in the blanks. Look, hasn't Trump said, Trump has said very aggressive things about how to deal with Russia, things that are more aggressive than anything the Biden administration has said. Yeah, so I have no idea where this is coming from. It just seems wrong to me.
Oh, I'm not sure if he's just alluding to your point, his previous anti-interventionist statements. Right. It is interesting, though, because Chomsky has been very forceful in his criticism of Donald Trump. He was, very aggressive about the need to vote for Joe Biden, regardless of his failings in the 2020 election. He believed very deeply that the environment is something that we cannot wait on, and that Donald Trump's kind of fascistic tendencies were another reason why one could not ever withhold their vote. I mean, I very famously in a debate with him on my show, was so ardently against the idea of doing anything that could result in Donald Trump being president again. So the idea that he is giving kind of any quarter to an argument that Trump would be better policy-wise on Ukraine does seem to be an interesting departure from what he said in the past.
I mean, I think it's an interesting sign of the times of, the anti-interventionist left, the foreign policy left, being more aligned with far left and far right, being more aligned on foreign policy. I mean, it comes through on the show. Your suspicion, Kim's suspicion, my to some degree similar. Yes,
we're doing a horseshoe theory.
Right? No, we really are. So I understand it conceptually, But Trump has not said the things Chomsky is saying that he said about Ukraine.
Yeah.
He said, he hasn't really said anything particular. He hasn't. So now we're giving Trump points for theoretically maybe being, like, it seemed.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe it's indicative of how few voices there are, anti-interventionist voices there are on Ukraine, period. I understand why Glenn Greenwald is wanting to highlight this, because Chomsky is one of those people that liberals decide they care about once every 4 years when it's time for him to, get on the horn and tell us all to vote blue no matter who. And then they ignore all of his substantive and really important criticisms of the media and politics in general during the other 365 days of the year. So I understand why Glenn Greenwald wants to highlight this, even if the connection to what Trump may or may not have.
Trump essentially said that Russia wouldn't do this because Trump is so tough on them, the toughest anyone's ever been. Like, that's what he said, basically. Which doesn't suggest that's not really a non-intervention. I just don't, I don't get. I would love if Trump, I want Trump to articulate the policy that Chomsky just described, but he literally hasn't. So it's very confusing to me.
It is confusing, but I think the reason it was clipped and put out there is because it's attention grabbing, and it makes people mad. It makes people who want to characterize every anti-interventionist instinct from the left or the right as being Putin's puppet. We have come a little bit far from that narrative, and as compared to where we were, in March. But we're still a little bit in that place. And someone like Glenn Greenwald, who has been wanting to ring these alarm bells for a really long time, is going to use someone like Chomsky, who liberals do like to selectively quote, to push forth this kind of argument. We'll see if it actually incites more of a commentary from Donald Trump.
Maybe I'm just raw, because the one time we tried to talk on the show about what Trump had said about Ukraine, we played that clip in which he said the election had been rigged, which has not been rigged. The election was legitimate, and Joe Biden is our president. But we played it and didn't correct that, and then we got suspended from YouTube.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I understand. You might be a little sensitive about that, Robby.
Well, up next, Batya Ungar-Sargon will join us to discuss Trevor Noah's unironic takedown of mainstream media. Stay tuned.